ahead and get started. My name is Craig Douglas. I'm here with Patrick, Tom, and Rick for our TPA workshop on the recently published fee schedule rates. We are going to be using the Q&A and chat today, so if you have any questions, please feel free to place them in the Q&A or you can put them in chat. We'll make sure that chat's enabled for everybody. We're recording the session today, so as we typically do, we'll follow up with any materials or references that we discussed during the meeting today sometime next week. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Craig. As Craig mentioned, Tom Krofcheck also here today. Tom is the chair of our Financial Management Committee. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Rick, for joining us on such a busy day. Appreciate you being here as the rates drop earlier this morning. TPA members, you should have received an announcement this morning with a link to those rates. So I guess even as we get started here, Rick, I want to thank you, bring you in. And I know we've had some questions that we forwarded to you. I just want to give you the chance if there's anything you want to announce right up front. It sounds like there may be some corrections forthcoming on the publication.
Thanks, Patrick, and good morning, everyone. I'm sorry. I mean, it's always great to have lots of eyes on these things, but at ODP, we don't always have lots of eyes. So apparently, when I was doing the calculations, I used the old CPS rates, not the enhanced rates that had been in effect. So we will be changing that, correcting that, and making an announcement today to update the CPS rates specifically.
Okay, Rick, that's great. I know I heard a lot of feedback on that. So, and if there's anything else you have questions about, we'll ask members to just kind of hold off. We'll try to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I've heard some other questions about maybe some other rates, but CPS I did hear about pretty broadly. And thanks, Rick, for being so prompt. I want to acknowledge Rick had written me before the session started with that information, so I knew that much. But thanks for kicking us off, Rick, with the correction and the quick turnaround. So in effect, people will get the correct rates. It doesn't going to affect anything as far as calculations. That'll be corrected. Did you say earlier today, or did you say today that they would get corrected and come out revised?
Yeah, we'll get something out today. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to walk through the announcement and the actual publication with you a little bit, Rick. So just to kind of set it up, we'll look at the effective date of the rates being July 1st, implementation date October 1 for billing purposes. Everything looks to be inclusive of performance-based contracting. These are final published rates, and even though they are final, the department is going to accept public comment. So I'm going to give a little foundation financially and probably start with the fiscal impact, Rick. But if you can go next slide, Craig, the advocacy that the associations did was largely centered on what the governor had put in the proposed budget in February. So if you see a couple of lines down, second bullet, $217 million in state funding to increase resources providers of home and community-based services. That was really the number that we were saying would leverage money into the fee schedule. So the $217 million is what we went throughout the spring into the summer advocating for. And of course, that was reduced in the enacted budget. So if you can go next slide, Craig. The governor's press release, and right around July 11th, perhaps the next day, the governor put out these figures. And these have really been the figures we've been working with ever since. So total, we've been talking this $354.8 million federal and state funding, $280 million to help raise wages for direct support professionals, $74.8 million process of clearing the emergency waiting list. So that is word for word from what the governor put out once the enacted budget was approved on July 11th. Next slide. So I'm going to start at the end of the announcement. So if you've had a chance to take a look at this, of course, before it gets into the rates that I know many people probably just jumped into, understandably, I want to tie this down with the previous slide. So you can see that the fiscal impact is identified identical to what was in the governor's press release. And if you also take a look at that state funding, we had been reporting before we really knew how this was going to shake out, that the enacted budget was a decrease of $93 million from what we had been seeking from what the governor had proposed. So if you look at that $93 million, plus the 125.751. You're roughly at the 217 we had been advocating for. So just wanted to call out that is all very consistent. If you've looked at this differently, we'll give you a chance to raise that a little bit later on in the Q&A segment. But just want to tie it down to proposed budget, what we advocated for, where the higher rates were based, and then now everything falling in line with the reduction. So next, I'll go into the actual bulletin announcement, if you can go there with me next, Craig. So background, I thought, Rick, is just important to sort of shed light on the foundation of this. And, you know, the last sentence really talked about the department is required to fund services within the amount of funds appropriated by the General Assembly. And the background also talks about targeted support management. And my understanding and takeaway was all of the HCBS ID waivers, so consolidated community living, PFDS, the adult autism waiver, in addition to the department established fees. So correct, Rick, anything you want to add there? Basically, it comes from what's approved in the budget, correct?
Yeah, exactly, Patrick. And in my 10 years here, this is the first time this scenario has played out. So it's quite unusual that, but yes, you're absolutely correct. We have to live within the available funding that's appropriated.
Yeah, and I'll add that, you know, whenever we were in that period of the budget was passed, but we really didn't know the implication for the fee schedule rates. You know, Kristen, the secretary, talked with us really about the need to tie to the appropriation. I think that's why I point out that the numbers have been clear and consistent. You know, not that we haven't been disappointed by the reduction, of course, but the fact that it is tied to appropriation. They've been very clear with us verbally. We've been making other arguments, of course, but again, I just wanted to tie it down to how it is published. So next slide. You know, I thought this was interesting as well, Rick, so I wanted to call it out. You know, methodology, I know typically you do methodology, sort of couple pages talking about methodology. This I found interesting in that it stated the fee schedule rates and department established fees were established by applying an inflationary adjustment factor of, you know, the 8%, 6% previously communicated. Those are no surprises. I think notwithstanding what you've just called out with CPS. Just glad to see inflationary adjustment factor noted in a publication. Again, I could argue what inflation is, and you and I had a long conversation about inflation, but we knew the 8 and the 6 were coming. The inflationary adjustment factor, I just wanted to call that out for our members. It's the first time I've really seen that included and worded that way. And am I wrong about that, Rick, or is it methodology change? I know it's just one sentence. That's the entirety of the methodology statement, but I thought it was interesting and wanted to note it.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Patrick. You know, obviously, the proposed rates had been out there previously, and then we had gone through a totally more extensive and different methodology that we normally go through. But given the need to adjust to the appropriation, this was the I think the most straightforward and simplest thing we could have done.
Yeah, agreed, and hopefully it can continue to lay foundation for us going forward. So the next section is really, most of everything else appears under the section titled Payments for Residential Services. So if we go there, I have this broken down into 2 slides, you know, really just sort of setting out. We are talking really the licensed res-hab, the unlicensed res-hab, life sharing, supported living services. This is going to speak to performance-based contracting now. So payments for residential services are, of course, included in the fee schedule. Of course, all services included in the fee schedule. But this is the point in the announcement where it begins to break down pay for performance and the tier assignment. So if you go next slide, Craig. Now this identifies the tiers. This first part really, though, gets into performance-based contracting's pay for performance segment. So to receive a supplemental payment, the provider must meet or exceed performance targets for staff credentialing, employment of individuals served, transition of individuals to the life sharing or supported living services, rural provider capacity, and reporting on the use of technology. So if you go one more slide, Craig, with you, Rick, I just wanted to call out that this is the proper interpretation. First of all, this is addressing pay for performance. And this next slide, I really just sort of took out of the paragraph breaking down staff credentialing, employment rural provider capacity technology reporting, the exact wording in that paragraph is as it appears there. Will receive one-time or combined payments up to 3% of ODP eligible service revenue from the applicable review period or established payment amount for qualifying event. For the transition to life sharing or supported living, that would be from residential rehabilitation. Those are the payments, $30,000 broken into 2 installments. First installment when the person transitions into that service, second installment after they have been in that service for 6 consecutive months. So I guess I'll stop there, Rick, and throw it back to you. That is the pay for performance component described in there. And are those criteria accurate?
Yeah, definitely. It's I would say though, on the pay for performance side, at the very high level, this is a very accurate statement. We're still working through, you know, the specific details for each of the different types of pay for performance. And the revision to, you know, two reporting periods or two, you know, windows for providers to report. That has kind of changed the timing on the pay for performance. But there is, we are getting through those, and there should be more specifics around each of them, especially the credentialing and the technology reporting. I think those will be the first 2 to come out on pay for performance in the coming weeks.
Okay, good. And you brought it up now, Rick. So I know last Friday we had some questions about the timing window because of the additional opportunity for tier assignments. So do you have any more details, or can you elaborate on that as far as when pay for performance, or will that come out at a later time based on tier assignments?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything I can talk about today on that, Patrick, other than to say, you know, we are working through the, you know, the specifics around specifically credentialing and technology reporting. I think the employment and rural capacity will probably be coming out a little bit later, but the credentialing and technology will be the first to come out here very shortly.
Okay, and Rick, when it's a little ambiguous at the 3%, I think, you know, the biggest takeaway is up to 3% of your revenue. That's not really an unusual factor. I know ODP applies that in other instances, you know, one-time supplemental payments, for instance. But it's worded as or, so this could be 3% of program eligible revenue or established payment amount. Is that still in the works as well? That for some of these, it may be we're going to set a performance criteria and a number versus the 3%?
It's still under discussion. Yes, exactly. I mean, we want to make it as simple as possible, but we also want it, you know, tied to, you know, reasonable expectations and performance standards. So I think, you know, in total, I mean, when we come up with the big numbers, you know, how we look at, you know, what bucket of money is allocated to performance-based contracting and specifically pay for performance. That's where we get the 3% at. How we actually distribute that 3% amongst the various pay for performance measures is still being discussed. So, but in total, it'll be roughly 3%. Yes.
Okay. Did you reference anything on timeline on that, Rick? Did you say forthcoming anytime soon? I mean, no dates firm, it doesn't sound like, but any more guidance?
No, I know we're going to publish the kind of the criteria and the way we're going to do the calculations shortly. We haven't really come out with anything on the timing of when the payments would be made, though.
Okay, so we'll go next slide. I think that closes out the portion of the publication that addresses pay for performance. So the next paragraph addresses residential tiers and in the payment for those. So again, we're just talking about residential defined as the scope of licensed, unlicensed tab, life sharing supported living. So this has been known for a while now. There's going to be 3% add-ons for clinically and 5% for clinically enhanced, 3% for select. But I want to call out per individual served. This is a question that I think that has been asked and answered, but since it's in the new publication, per individual served will refer to all persons served by a provider organization. Correct, Rick?
Residentially, yes, correct. Mhm.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I should have that clarification. So the original question was it just going to be for the folks that were receiving those particular services or for all the people served in residential? So the scope is all people served in residential will get the 3 or 5% bump on that.
Yeah, correct. And the way that'll work is it'll just be it'll just, whatever their fee schedule is tied to their needs group, size of home, with or without day. Uh, it'll just be an adder on top of that daily fee schedule.
Okay, and I think that's an understanding most members have already. Just wanted to underscore it one final time. So I want to go to Tom Krofcheck next to sort of dive into Tom's analysis of the rates, ask some questions of his own. Craig, is it an opportune time to look at anything just on the publication question-wise? You don't want to defer some things.
There are a few questions in the Q&A. I think we'll let Tom do his thing, and then maybe we can pivot to Rick for these questions.
Okay.
One of the things I see in the Q&A, it's not really a question, just an acknowledgement of Rick and all of your service. I know you've been doing this for almost 10 years or maybe over 10 years. You could have taken your talents like LeBron James to anywhere in the world, and you chose to, come to ODP and stay at ODP. Despite the fact that you stood up there at the podium and took some pretty challenging questions at times when the General Assembly didn't have your back and you couldn't spend money that you didn't have. You answered those tough questions and you kept coming back. I know you're retiring next week, so on behalf of everyone, congratulations and thank you for coming back. And you could have done anything this Friday morning and you chose to come here. So just thank you so much. It's really clear that just like these advocates that ask you the tough questions, you're definitely an advocate for people with disabilities, and it shows. It's just unfortunate that the General Assembly hasn't really put the money out there to back you guys with all the things that Governor Shapiro, Deputy Secretary Aarons, and you really wanted to do with those proposed rates. So on that note, I know that if you guys did what you wanted to do, that the rates would be substantially higher than they are now. And fortunately, under Governor Shapiro's direction, ODP and Mercer, it's my understanding, updated a number of the fee schedule rate assumptions and published that. And through a right to know request, the actually sound ranges came out. So I compared all of the rates at 6 and 8%, taking out the anomalies of the typographical errors that will be fixed. And it looks like 118 of the new rates at 6 or 8% higher will be lower than what Mercer and ODP determined to be actuarially sound. How's that possible? Or what are you guys doing about those rate setting assumptions?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, as you guys have, first of all, thanks, Tom. I appreciate your kind words. Over the over the period that we're talking about, obviously inflation has been higher than 6 or 8%. So that would be the primary factor for having those ranges, be different than what's published. What we're doing about that, I don't know.
I looked at the website this morning and I could have missed it, or maybe it's not published yet. Does ODP intend to publish any new rate setting assumptions that correspond to the rates that were published in the bulletin this morning?
We do not, to my knowledge.
Okay. And then just thinking through, you kind of put in a very difficult situation relative to the fact that you can't spend more money than the General Assembly has allotted, despite the fact that the administration wanted to spend more. But we also have 6100.571, which is the rate setting regulations, which require the department to at least every 3 years to go through all the rate setting assumptions and update them to ensure that they meet a number of attributes necessary to provide care. And as you said, primarily also consider inflation, which you said is larger than 6 to 8%. If I'm doing my math correctly, I think the last time that the rates were updated was January 1st, 2022, which would mean we're 2.5 years out, and come January 1st, 2025, we would be outside of that regulatory requirement to update the rate setting assumptions at least every 3 years. Can you speak to any plans that you're aware of relative to updating them, or what would happen as of January 1st when we're out of compliance with 6100.571?
I'm sorry, I can't. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know what the plan might be. But I don't have any other information I can provide there.
Got it. And then just, I know we've been advocating a lot for some of the rate setting assumptions and rates to be updated, every year, or, every 2 years. 3 years, it just takes too long. It becomes very difficult for us to advocate for the rates, and ODP to advocate to the rates to the General Assembly, because when we wait 3 years, it just seems like it's such an astronomical amount. Whereas if rate increases happened every year, it would appear to be much more manageable for the General Assembly to get that passed through. Are you aware, has there been any discussions of doing it at a more frequent cadence than it has historically been?
I do know that you guys have continued to advocate for the annual adjustment. I do know that some of the we've gotten legislative inquiries about it, and we've done some analysis as well. So I do think there's some traction or some interest in pursuing the idea. But I don't know that we've come out with a an ODP or a DHS policy regarding that.
Got it. And then just to clarify expectations on some of the anomalies, that the typographical errors that were in the publication today, will the PA bulletin, I understand that just goes out once a week. I know ODP communication will likely come out this week. Do you know if the PA bulletin will be revised this week, or would it be next week? And how does that correspond relative to the appeal rights that are associated with the PA bulletin publication?
Yeah, I know we are planning to get a ODP announcement out today on it. The PA bulletin takes longer. I suspect it'll probably be a few weeks before we would update that in the PA bulletin. And accordingly, your appeal rates would be tied to the PA bulletin publication date.
And based on what you know now, that would not change the October 1 implementation date. You still are confident that you guys would have enough time to have the new appropriate rates into Texas to be paid starting October 1, and for most of the services would be retroactive to January 1st, with the exception of those that were indicated otherwise, right?
That will be no problem.
Okay. And on that note, just provider logistics, as I put my billing hat on and I start to think through this. So when would you anticipate ODP would be doing the mass adjustment to make this retroactive? And would there only be one mass adjustment, or would you anticipate there might have to be multiple in the event that some September claims aren't billed then, or there's authorization issues, et cetera?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, unfortunately, we're getting pretty good at doing these gross adjustments. Not that they're one of my favorite things to do, but yeah, I would expect that we would probably wait at least through 30 days past September 30th, so probably into November, until we'd actually do the gross adjustments. And then we would, over the course of the next 3 to 4 months, continue to monitor what kind of billing comes in after the fact to see if additional ones are necessary.
So in terms of cash flow, I know I was on a regional provider meeting earlier this week, and some providers indicated that they were into their lines of credit on a cash flow crunch. When do you think providers would expect to receive that first mass gross adjustment?
Likely before Thanksgiving. I mean, from a cash perspective, I mean, you'd probably see the You probably see the amounts on your remittance advice, early November, and then you probably see the cash prior to Thanksgiving.
Got it. And I appreciate all those responses. Craig, I know some questions popped up in the chat, but I didn't have time to read them. Have you taken a look at them?
Hey, while you're doing that, Craig, I'll also state that since publication and now potentially republication came up, I've seen a couple questions, and we've addressed it briefly here on the rate appeal. So I want to let everyone know that for today, we just want to get into the details of the publication. We will hold a separate session for people that want to be educated on appeal rights, and after you've taken a look at the rates and done the comparisons, which I know many of you have done. I will address one thing though, Rick, because I see a question. This hiccup, as you're stating it, indicates that there'll be another publication in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, not in your control, so it'll come out at some point. But I'm going to speculate, Rick, and I'll let you just comment on whether it sounds practical or not. There are times when ODP will publish just the corrected rates. So for those of you that are thinking about when the clock starts on that, I mean, our expectation has been rates are final. That's why we wanted to call that out. Their final rates. ODP will accept comment, but it's very possible, even if they publish again, they would not publish the entire fee schedule, perhaps just publish the corrected CPS rates. So my guess, Rick, would be that would mean, the clock starts again on the newly published rates. They're not necessarily going to publish the entire fee schedule again. And if you don't want to comment, Rick, you don't have to. It's just I want to kind of put that out there. And these are discussions we're going to defer to some time at a later meeting.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, Patrick. I would guess that we would publish everything again, but until we get there, I don't know.
Okay, thanks, Rick. And then Craig, you were going to go to some questions, and maybe we can just kind of go to question panel here and just see what comes in. And then Rick, I did see something on the retro. We've been getting questions on the life sharing with and without day. So I think some of those are going to be in the Q&A too, but anything that you can clarify, any sort of aberrations from a straight out retro payment. I think some of those questions will come up here, but I'll just flag that as we go in. So Craig, I'll turn it over to you to kind of call out the questions for Rick.
So we got quite a few of them out there. So I'll try to summarize best I can. It seems like one question is, Rick, can you comment on if there were any changes to the assumptions that went into the recently published rates?
No, I mean, I can't necessarily comment on that since we are, like I said, outside of our normal process here. So we did not go back and change any assumptions as a result of doing the inflationary adjustment.
So Rick, I'll jump in on that too. So I mean, you noted this earlier. You had this whole list of assumptions posted, published. You went to a different method of enacting the budget and did across the board. So is it likely there won't be changes to the assumptions? And you've just kind of switched to, you have the appropriation, you did an across the board adjustment, or do you think the department will go back and want to make adjustments to that?
I would say that it's likely that we will not publish any updated assumptions associated with these rates because, it's totally, like I said, outside of our normal process, and it would not be representative of what we did to come up with these rates.
Understood. Thanks, Rick. And Craig, I'll try to go through, I'm sure Tom will as well, to call out anything that we want to make sure that Rick addresses. And Rick, you're welcome to jump in on anything that you see that we missed that you want to comment on.
We did publish the new caps for the community living and PFDS waivers. Those are 47,000 and 97,000. So those are out there.
Craig, I haven't been keeping track of where. Do you want to go through Q&A and see if there's outstanding questions that we can address?
Rick, one question early on in the discussion was there was, you know, there was this error. Can you tell us what those CPS one-on-one rates are going to be?
I have to go back and validate that this morning before the announcement goes out. But you can just take the existing rate and multiply it by 1.08. That'll be the new rate.
And then Rick, Chris Elliott had a question relative to pay for performance that I think a lot of providers have. Just clarity that pay for performance will be entirely separate from tier assignment. So let's say a provider is not in a position to apply in August. They plan to apply for their tier in February or March timeframe. Should pay for performance be rolled out prior to then, as we hope it will be, would a provider that doesn't apply until February still be eligible for pay for performance before then?
Yes, that's my understanding, Tom. I with the caveat that we also need all providers to sign a new provider agreement. So to the extent they have not done that already, then they would not be eligible.
Thank you for that clarification. His provider agreement is separate from the application, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Rick, I see a question about the application of inflationary factor not being used for the ineligible rate. Can you comment on that?
I don't know that I have any particular comment to make there, Patrick, other than, you know, ineligible rates are state-only money.
Looks like there's also a question about the recently collected financial data and if that, you know, if you can comment on the goal of that as it relates to these rates.
Yeah, so yes, we have made a lot of progress on collecting that financial data, and we certainly appreciate it. I think that you know, we've started to use that as we are moving towards performance-based contracting and looking at, you know, provider readiness and provider sophistication from a financial standpoint. So so I think that is serving the intended purpose, and we will continue to do that, to my knowledge, on an annual basis. So appreciate the support there. I mean, think of it as, you know, another way to, you know, as we're looking to tier providers and you know, reward higher performing providers, think of it as another way for you guys to distinguish yourself and your performance.
Looks like there's a question about billing as well. So with these rates, should providers be billing September services or should they be holding any billing?
Please do not hold any billing ever. We like you to bill promptly. And, you know, whatever the rates will be, you know, implemented October 1st. So anything up till September 30th, we'll be able to go back and look at what adjustments need to be made.
Looks like there's a few questions about life sharing without day and how that will work.
Well, I know we are putting together a an announcement about life sharing with and without day and kind of the logistics on that. I will go back and look at the rates to see if there might have been a mistake there. But there'll be further communications forthcoming on that. That I believe is going to go into effect on October 1st as well. So we have a little time.
And there was a similar question in the chat relative to the service definition, since it's not currently in the ISP manual. Will that life sharing communication include any clarity on that?
Yes, definitely. I've seen some drafts of that. Mm-hmm.
Looks like we have a question about whether it looks like there were two autism waiver rates listed.
I'm not sure what that's referring to. I would appreciate some clarification if there's something that I need to look at. I don't know, Nancy, if you have any. 2 columns of rates. Okay, I'll go back and look at that, see if there's anything needs corrected there. It could have just been a formatting because we have the enhanced communication on the ID side and not on the AAW side.
Are the supports coordinators rates retro to July 1st?
Yes, the intent that is that all of these would be effective July 1st.
And then Rick, there was a question about why the delay of payments, that this is not being rolled out until October. I assume it's the amount of time it takes to put this into HCSIS and get this all rolled out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's certainly that's something we hope to improve with our new case management system. But yes, you're absolutely right. We have some
And I guess
system
similarly on that
limitations.
note, is it the requirement to have a public comment period? So this gives providers the opportunity to provide public comment for the next 30 days. I think I saw that in the bulletin this morning.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of it as well. Mhm.
I mean, when I think about that, what's the plan? Like, what is DHS even going to do with the public comments if we know that all the General Assembly gave you was enough to give you 6 and 8%, and you can't give any more?
I would, to your earlier question about, about the 3-year time period and what's going to happen in January. I mean, I would think that some of those public comments would help to inform that that discussion as well.
Great, we appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I saw a couple of comments and questions about DSP wage ranges and things. Those are rooted in assumptions. So I think you've already addressed that, Rick. There's not going to be really necessarily changes to assumptions, which I think we understand given where we are with the rates. And Rick, is it fair to say that if someone has a question on a rate, really the litmus test is just going to be take the current rate times 6 residential times 1.06 for a 6%, 8% increase for non-residential. If anyone's not coming up with that, then that's a fair question to ask why that is not the case. But that's the expectation across the board.
That's correct.
Okay. Hey, we don't have anything open at the moment, Rick. So while we're in this lull, I don't want to keep you any longer than we have to, because I'm sure you have a busy day and want to get it on with your weekend. And I do want to thank you, and I could not have said it any better than Tom Krofchek. So ditto everything Tom said. Really appreciate your time here today. We'll give a couple of moments if anybody has any lingering questions or our panelists here have anything else that we think we've missed, Rick. But greatly appreciate you carving out the time to do this a couple hours after these rates hit the internet. So it's very valuable to our members. Thank you for taking the time to answer our questions.
No worries, and it has been very enjoyable working with you guys over the years. So thank you for the kind words.
Likewise for us as well, Rick. We appreciate everything you've done. Good luck, best wishes to you. We will hopefully see you soon. Take care.
Thanks.